Thanks, everybody, for coming to our second presentation of our 2020 Arts and Architecture Lecture Series. I wanted to thank especially the Carmel Heritage Society for hosting the great reception. Just to give you a little bit of background on them, it's really wonderful to partner with them this year. They offer education and outreach about Carmel's cultural and architectural history. Their home is the First Murphy House, located at Lincoln and 6th in Carmel by the Sea. And hopefully many of you visited their last lecture where we also had a reception there, which was wonderful. What they're really well known for is their home tours, and on June 20th this year, they'll be hosting their 27th annual home tour. So I would encourage everyone to go to that. And if you want to know more about them or perhaps want to join, Linda Jaffe from Carmel Heritage will be out in the lobby after the lecture, and you can speak with her. As many of you know, we are going to do a home tour as well. And this is going to happen, instead of what the website says, will be on Sunday, May 10th. And we will be having homes and buildings of all the different architects we're focusing on this year. And so there'll be homes by Henry Hill, building by Will Shaw, homes by John Thotis, and George Brocofalo. So that will be exciting, and we'll allow you to start buying tickets to that very soon on our website, which is, if you don't know, Arts and Architecture, AIAMB.com. Tonight we focus on an incredibly important architect in the development of this area. Not only was Will Shaw a very talented designer, but he was responsible for some of the community's most important building planning, historic preservation projects, and environmental policies. We're really fortunate this evening to have Polly Osborne, FAIA. Polly is an artist, architect, and environmentalist who was an early exponent of the environmental architecture movement. She also has some of the deepest family ties to the Monterey area and was introduced to the profession and mentored by none other than her stepfather, Will Shaw. So there's really no one else better suited to tell this story. Please join me in welcoming Polly Osborne.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm really happy you're here, and I'm really happy to be telling you about Will. I think that's got an echo. Is sound okay, Jeremy? Okay. Okay, so Will is, first let me thank a whole bunch of people, because even though I think of Will as a mentor because we spent a lot of time talking and walking architecture, these are some of the people that really worked with him and some of the people that know a lot more than I do. And then some people don't know him at all, but they gave me some great pictures, so they're on here too. Michael Moore, who drove all the way from Mendocino and is driving back after the lecture. He's crazy. He was really helpful, and so were Steve Chittister and Brian Jones. And I'd like to especially thank the Monterey Area Architectural Archives Resource, MARA. And I want also, this list represents the fact that Will rarely worked alone. He was a collaborator, and he often handed things off to his staff. So every time that I say Will did this or Will thought that, just keep in mind that except for his own houses, he was rarely working alone. In the Carmel Pine Cone in December, there was a mention of historical buildings being considered to be historical in the area, and Lobos Lodge down in the corner there you can see is one of them, and that's a Will building. That was written by Mary Schley. I contacted the historian that they used for that, and she had some wonderful additional things to say about Will. Although his buildings show his talent, his environmental approach encompassed a far broader range of concerns. a deep thinker about community development and planning, Will wanted to leave an imprint on the region rather than simply executing individual projects. And this was really his palette. He had projects in Japan, in Australia, in Portugal, but the peninsula and Big Sur were his true love, and he really focused on this area. Here's an example of a few things he was involved with around the peninsula. I actually ran out of room, so I stopped putting stuff on here, but 30 years he did planning projects for Pebble Beach, lots of houses and even a gas station in there. In Carmel, he did hotels, commercial buildings, and then in the community things, urban renewal in Monterey, urban renewal in Salinas. He did churches, schools. He was one of the founders of the Monterey County Regional Park District. She goes on to say that in 1962, he talked to the Carmel Pine Cone, and he was railing against surface parking, citing the costliness of land and the unattractiveness of cars. But not all cars. Here you see him as a judge of the Concours d'Elegance because Will loved beauty, whether it was a beautiful Rolls Royce or looking inside a James Lavera bowl. He just loved beautiful things, and I think it was a motivation for him more than anything else. But he was my stepfather, so most of our conversations were done kind of like this, you know, wearing a silly hat, drink in your hand, and so I never worked for Will. Or like here, where I'm a young architecture student, and I'm saying, hey, Will, guess what building I'm dressed as? And he impressing me no end by saying, Villa Garche, of course, by Corbusier. I was like, wow. This thing has stopped working. Is there someone up there that can change a slide? Okay, it started again. No, it didn't. Okay, somebody help me. Okay, so Will was born in 1924. He had an early childhood career as an actor. He was one of Spanky and our gang. And then he did UCLA undergraduate work in engineering, and he did military service, and then he graduated from UC Berkeley in 1950 in architecture. And his main teachers there were William Worcester and Eric Mendelsohn. Then he started Bertie Shaw Kearns, which became Bertie Shaw. That was 1955 that they opened up that practice. And they did the Monterey Peninsula Airport Control Tower, among other things, some apartment buildings, a lot of churches, and a number of schools. And then in 1967, he got the Prix de Rome, which is a prize where you get to go live in Rome for a year and really do whatever you want. But you know, it's given to 30 architects, artists, writers, and they go live in this great villa for a year. And he married my mother the same year, so that was their honeymoon, was a year in Rome. And off they go to their lovely villa. You can see the villa down in the corner there. The romantic, happy new couple. And Will loved the streets of Trastevere where the villa was located. And it became a big part, I think, in how he started, the way he saw things down the road. When he came back, he separated from Walter Bertie and started his own firm. It was a friendly parting. He really wanted to focus more on urban planning and public buildings. This is this is the Shell station in Carmel, and it looks very much the same today as it did then. And then in 1983, he won the Stanton Award, which and then was followed by the fellowship from the American Institute of Architects. And then he retired in the 90s and left his firm to Brian Jones and Steve Chittister, who spent a lot of hours with me. So they were really helpful in this. So I was trying to think about his influences, and Eric Mendelsohn seemed like I couldn't see it, you know. His buildings are pretty straight like that, and Mendelssohn's are kind of wonderfully organic. But then my sister found this wonderful sketch, a whole book of sketches of Mendelssohn's, and I thought, yeah, you know, I started to see it because this is Mendelssohn's sketch, and this is one of Will's initial sketches. And he had said that Mendelssohn gave him an approach to architecture, and you can kind of see that there's something going on there that's similar. William Worcester is much easier for me to see that, see the connection, the kind of unconventional approach to architecture, the restraint of materials, and the way that he set things in the land. You see this like at the Connell House on Scenic, that very, you know, simple materials, very restrained, but, you know, opening up. The building is doing the job it's supposed to do here. And in the Captain Cooper School in Big Sur, very simple materials, but, you know, a beautiful plan that seems to connect people to the land outside and be a nice shelter for learning. And then later, you know, the materials may become richer, like this, the Cone House, but still the restraint remains. About the same time, just for context, 3 years after Will opened his office, the Wild Bird was published for the first time by Mark Mills for Nathaniel Owings. And Nathaniel Owings and Will knew each other and sometimes worked together and sometimes had differences. But I think this building must have been a very important thing for all of, I mean, I was 8 years old when this building was published, and I was going, holy cow, what a cool thing. And then also Sea Ranch in 73 started up, and Sea Ranch was, I think, also very exciting for him. And the master planner of that is Lawrence Halprin, and the condominium one, Moore, Linden, Turnbull, and Whitaker, you know, these were really beautiful, iconic images of that time. And Lawrence Halprin, I think, was a particularly important influence for Will. He was Will's landscape architect on a number of projects, so they knew each other. And you can see Halprin's influence, especially when you look at things like he wanted to tuck things back, the buildings back against the trees or the mountains, and leave the open commons. And when you look at, say, Carmel Valley Ranch, you see all the buildings well, this is a newer picture, so there's some buildings that are out there, but all the residences were tucked up against the hills, and just the clubhouse was out there in the middle. And it left not only the golf course, but other big common open meadow areas. Okay, so I love top 10 lists. So I decided to do this as a top 10 list. And I borrowed heavily from anybody I talked to besides my own top 10 list when I made this. So all those people you saw on the list, there were a few in there that they'll know who they are if they're in the audience. Okay, so number 10, look up. Architects present some of their most satisfying and surprising creations just out of reach, on walls, roofs, ledges, and upper stories. Come on, you can do it. Okay. So this is the central ridge beam in Will's Pfeiffer Point House. And it is featured, it is framed with skylight to emphasize it. And then the roof, the ceiling material is coming up over the beam so that there's no interruption. You don't have, beam and then you have the ceiling and then another beam. It's uninterrupted, and then the roof is put above that. And then there's a loft up there so you can get really close to it. And if you follow that central ridge beam down, you can see this is kind of like two sheds crashing into each other, and then that beam comes down. And if you follow it down, you will see that it does not interrupt the view because it's cantilevered before it gets to the wall. So your eye is led down by this high member, and then you're completely, it dissolves into the landscape. Okay, so number 9, look in. Small landscapes, trails and around houses, the design of the approach to a shed, sometimes only visible when inches away. The first thing I thought of when Michael Moore sent me this was this, which is another way of putting it, which is Sam Morse, my cousin, who built nearly 30 of Will's buildings, that the concept is the framework while the detail is the essence. And this is the kitchen that he did for my mother, for her, on her specifications. Everything she needed was within, arm's reach, just as she liked it. She wanted it open to everything, but at the same time, too small for anyone else to share it with her. And there she is in her domain. And another, also Pfeiffer Point House, little spots. There are places at the house where there's trails, and Glenn's here, who knows it better than anyone, where you just say, oh, is that a trail or is not a trail? Let's go down and see where it is. And then you come to some nice view. The perfect beam cut. And my favorite, the toilet paper holder that perfectly matches its wall. Look out and through, create a unity with follow-through. Enjoy opportunities to move through and link rather than separate built environments. Trastevere, well, the first day that I landed to visit my mother and Will in Trastevere, Will drags me out onto the streets and says, you got to see how this works. And he's saying, now when you look down that street, see how it turns, see how the corner turns? Don't you just want to know what's around that corner because of the shape of the street? And then, of course, you'd go around the corner and there'd be something wonderful. And it was all planned, or not planned, but it worked out. And he spent his entire time at the American Academy studying those streets and noting all those places like that on Via Aurelia. And his comment was the street should be a delightful aesthetic experience. It should be reversible and capable of being enjoyed in both directions. And he took that idea and he brought that into his buildings. Here at the Highlands Inn, you start up this kind of lovely set of stairs and come to this beautiful door. And then you see the canopy over you that's kind of inviting because it's complex, and that skylight starts to appear. And then the skylight is pulled all the way through the building, so you're drawn in. And then at the end, he had the vista view, which he called this the vista view. You know, you come to the end, and then you look out and see the ocean, and then you go back and go down the stairs around the side. Now the vista view is gone, you go straight down. But the payoff is still there, so, you know, buildings change. If you look at it in his own house in Big Sur, you don't really see the house at all when you're at the top of the driveway when you've parked your car, and then you get this little peekaboo look, and then you come down this path that you practically have to like go bend down for the oak trees, and then come through this low door, and then it opens up into this beautiful entry space. Number 7, beauty in materials, natural resource ethic. Celebrate the materials, repurpose the materials, and have fun with materials. Okay, this roof on the Lisbon Lane house is a special thing. This is ceramic tile made by Gladding McBean in Sacramento, and it's such a beautiful, rich material, and it's offset so beautifully by the red in the windows, and and this house also has this 3'4" grid, which Will loved. So 3'4" times 3 is 10, and so every third one is 10 feet. It's easy for the architects, but it drives the builders crazy. And also in sense of materials resources, or knowing where your talent is. All Saints Episcopal Church in Carmel has this beautiful stained glass window, and he basically designed the baptistry around this window. And then there's Dolan Creek Bridge. So Dolan Creek Bridge was taken down in late 60s, I think. Late 60s? 50s. Okay, so Fred Farr got some, Will got some. I've had several other people come up to me and say other architects got some, but anyway, this building had a great afterlife, and that was the building that he built his Big Sur house with. And he made sure in that process to let you see that it used to be a bridge. You know, the bolt holes were still there, the grease stains on the stairs. It appears in the doors and in the floors, and it's a great thing. Now, number 6. We're still on our top 10. We're down to number 6. This one's called Follow Your Gut. The building must be delightful. And on that, below that is something he was always telling me. They always forget how long it took, how much it cost, but they never forget whether they like it. And I think also that following in your gut means that you go outside your comfort zone now and then. And this is the architecture classroom at Cal Poly, and I think this building was really outside of his comfort zone. He was, you know, he did a lot of small community things, but this was a gigantuan building. And if you notice the rectangles in the design of the facade, those rectangles are actually all trusses, and every truss in those has a different function and has a different set of rebar. It's even though it sort of looks like a big bunch of boxes, it's actually very complicated. And these are the trusses being poured in place. The building was kind of color-coded as to what was going on. And it had a piazza, which I think he must have been inspired by his Italian trips, because underneath the building is like a piazza with these stairs going down. Oops, why did it do that? Help, help. Okay, so this is more what I think of Will doing with concrete. This is the Shell station in Carmel, and here he's playing the concrete off of this white brick with texture, and he's even got the little shells in there, in the columns. And I think of that, or, you know, playing it against the wood and a floor. This is more what I think of Will doing. But this note about clients, this was his worst client and his best client. And it took him 2.5 years to design his own house. Am I getting a lot of feedback? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, this was his worst client. But he did the best house there. Okay, so pause at courtyards and arrivals. He loved courtyards. This is Spyglass Woods in Pebble Beach. You drive off of a vehicular spine into a car courtyard, and then you leave your car and you go into your own courtyard and then into your home. So, and this is the house on Lisbon Lane, and this house was entirely in the courtyard. So you drive in, you leave the car, you come to this massive gate that you think is going to take you into a house, because the gate is massive and there's a massive wall there, and you think, oh, I'm at the front door, and then there's the gate back over on the right, and you come into this courtyard, and of course there's Stolen Creek Bridge represented in a fountain, and you're coming to the front door, which is here, and then you go through the door, and you have another kind of pause at the entry, and then go around into the living room. The Lobos Lodge that was mentioned in the Pinecone article is another courtyard building, and this one is a very sweet sequence too. When you're on Ocean Avenue, there's like this little mini courtyard there where you can stop and take a break, and then you slip almost, I feel like this space is almost like a medieval entry because it's so narrow, and then you come in, and there's a big beautiful tree there that they surveyed in 3 dimensions so that not a single branch would have to come off of that during construction. And there's something about this tree, it makes me laugh. I feel like it's like a voyeur, because all these branches are kind of looking right at windows. It just kind of creeps around everywhere, that space. And then here's a courtyard building that I go to often. This is the visitor center in Garland Park. And this is the plan, and you can see there on the right that this courtyard is defined by the columns of the roof, and then you have a secondary organization with the adobe wall, which is so beautiful because, you know, adobe was one of the first materials used, and in this kind of primitive, simple structure, that it's repeated, and then the ranger's office in the back kind of repeating that. Okay, so You see back there the captured corner and the columns and the secondary organization from the wall. And so here's the quiz, is what is the building on the left? Captured corner, secondary organization with the walls, defined by the columns. Does anyone know? No. No, it's a section of a building, of a whole building. It's not anything about bathrooms. It's a section of a whole nother building, a piece of that other building. Nobody knows what it is. Right, who said that? All right. It's 7th and Dolores. We're all going to go there and have no host bar drinking afterwards. So you're all invited. So there's the lower adobe wall and this nice little courtyard. Okay, number 4, pay attention to the environment. Protect the inhabitant and nature with a sense of place. Okay, so this is one of Will's doodles. This is the doodle about the house at Pfeiffer Point. And he ended up writing, "Love is a shell." And this was always sitting around on the coffee table. And this was their refuge, my mother and Will's place to go and be together. And you can see it's like a shell, if you can see it at all in this photo. It's tucked up against the hill. I enhanced it here so you could see it better. It's really almost like a mollusk, you know, sort of clinging to that hillside. And it has a very protective feeling inside. It's not big and open to this magnificent view. Actually, the lowest walls in the place are the ones facing the view. And the highest walls are the ones facing a little protected courtyard in the back. But that creates this kind of cathedral experience in the back. And so this is my first wedding. It's back there. And the front deck is kind of, you go and surrender there because you're in that beautiful view. That's the surrender to nature location. And looking at that front, if you look at the right on the plan there, you can see that front deck, it isn't really that big, and it's off center from that spine we talked about before that goes down the middle. So it's not interrupting if you're inside gazing out at that view. That deck isn't interrupting it at all. Whoops, did it again. Okay, I'm mad at this thing now. So anyway, after everyone leaves, and it's again Mother and Will's little hideout, so it was a very cozy place. And that same feeling of that kind of hovering on the land is also represented in the Carmel Valley Ranch, the way he did the clubhouse and kind of tucked it down close to the land. Number 3, cultivate relationships with interesting people. Will was really, really good at this. He would spend hours in the office on the phone to people. And he did a lot of fun things with them. And okay, so 7th and Dolores. Let's talk about that for a minute because I get all this stuff like, wasn't that a Walter Burdi building? Or did Will have anything to do with that building? And this is kind of part of, you know, his collaborative nature. He and Walter Burdi started it together, and then they split their partnership. Then Walter Burdi did the design development. Then Will did the construction documents. And then they both did construction review together. So it really was a collaboration. And more collaboration with great talent, Brad Bowman's Concrete. And there's the whole plan. See, that's the part on the left is what I put in that other part, because I saw, you know, it's kind of similar. And then more interesting people, Doc's lab. So for those of you that don't know, in the 50s, Doc Ricketts' lab, Doc Ricketts was a character in Cannery Row, but a real guy. And his lab came up for sale on Cannery Row. And a group of guys bought it, and they turned it into their clubhouse. So this was guys hanging out. And here's a batch of them here. And there are a lot of movers and shakers in the community. And Hank Ketchum, who was one of them, liked to describe it as a group of men who met to exchange tall tales, sip liberally, and pig out on hairy-chested buffets. And yeah, that's definitely a hairy-chested buffet there. So, but that's not all they did. They were actually, I mean, when they got talking and wanted to do something, they actually went and did it, you know. And it was this group, not only did they save Doc's lab itself, because I'm sure someone would have torn it down, because it was just an old shack, really. It was, you know, this group was, really a lot of people from this group who bought Big Creek, that then became UC's Landell's Big Creek Reserve. And so that may not have been preserved in such a wonderful way had they not hung out and talked. The Monterey Jazz Festival was another important thing on the peninsula that really evolved out of conversations in that gang. All right, so here's another gang of guys and girls. This is Fred Farr and Don McQueen and Will and Margaret and Nat Owings and Dee. So Big Sur washed out the post office and the grocery store, and they're looking for a new site for the village of Big Sur in this picture. And they didn't get all they wanted in that effort, but they got some of it. But Will and Fred worked really hard together on the Big Sur, on the Coast Highway Masterplan. At one point, Caltrans thought it might be a good idea to have a giant freeway going all the way down Highway 1. And you can imagine what that would have done to the landscape. But Will and Nat worked on the Big Sur Foundation together. The Big Sur Foundation, I found this in the scrapbook. I thought it was kind of cool. This is a donation from an art student. She'd never been to Big Sur, but she got moved by the whole idea of the place. Another important friend was Ansel Adams, and they bought this cannery together, the Enterprise Cannery, and Will tore out the front of it and opened it up, made it come back to life. He put his office in the top floor. There's where his office was and where Holdren Letsky is now. Also with Ansel, they formed the Foundation for Environment environmental design. This is also from Cara Brunzell, wrote me this. He went to LBJ's White House Conference on Natural Beauty, where he had a session called the New Suburbia to advocate that the US experiment with building a completely new planned city as an antidote to sprawl and a model for 20th century development. Remember, Will came from LA, so he saw his hometown really grow from, you know, the kind of boom that made it sprawl and spread. So he was pretty adamant that his new hometown or new home area of the Monterey Peninsula didn't become that. And his own comment on that was, a new approach to the shaping of our environment is a national need. It must be a national goal. Until design consideration is given to all aspects of man-made as well as natural landscapes, we are doomed to ever-deepening drabness. And I think that would have been the hell he could not survive, was ever-deepening drabness. So, number 2 on our top 10, study history and historical connections. He was the chairman for the executive committee of the Monterey Foundation, and he was its president. And it was originally formed to preserve adobes. And then it spread, now it has a broader mission statement. These are some of the adobes and other buildings in Monterey that he restored. He loved walking the streets of Monterey. This house, when he came back from Rome with my mother, they bought the Casa della Torre, which is a wonderful building. It has this big, beautiful window that Myron Oliver put in the 20s, and other than that, it's very much like it was. When you're inside looking out, you get that, it has a beautiful north light that's filling the whole room. And it's full of these little deep special windows and just sort of wonderful sculptural experiences within the house. This is the Cooper Malera adobe, how it looked before Will and Hall and Goodhue. Is Don here? All right. Hall and Goodhue and Will Shaw collaborated on the restoration of this building. And I know I'm not using the right terms, so the historians can give me a hard time about restoration, reconstruction, rehabilitation. Anyway, they did a lot of stuff. You can see here that there were bent beams put in to redo it structurally. And it was basically torn down to its inner skin. It had seismic members put in that were pretty significant. New roof on the lower part, bringing it back to the Andrew Malera days. So apparently, up above that balcony, up on the second floor, back at the wall, there's a very magnificent beam that goes the length of the building, which this photograph's a little foreshortened. That's actually a very, very long, incredible beam. But nobody can see it because now it's been restored upstairs too, and it has all this great wallpaper up there and stuff. But I think somebody should have made a little window in the wall there so you could see what a great redwood beam was holding up that side. Now there's a cafe in the one-story part facing Alvarado, and they use the Malera brand on their sourdough. So, and now the barns have been basically rebuilt. So one of the problems with the 70s restoration was that they didn't do the barns then, and so there was no income for the property, and it made it difficult to keep it up. Now they've done these barns so they can have weddings and stuff there. And they've also done new gardens there that are maintained by the Historic Garden League with all plants that would have existed because actually Andrew Malera brought the artichoke to California. This is another historic building that's near and dear to my heart. This building was, as I was growing up, this building was on my grandfather's property, and it was our playhouse. And then when we were teenagers, it's where we took our boyfriends and girlfriends. And anyway, it was near and dear to us. It was built in for the World's Fair on Treasure Island by a man named, why am I drawing a blank on his name? Thank you, Dudley Carter. And it was built without any nails. It was a replica of a Haida Indian lodge, and then he took it apart after the World's Fair and took it down to the river, Carmel River, and was living in it when my grandfather happened by and liked it. And Dudley Carter was sort of ready to go back to Canada, so he sold it to him for $500 and took it apart, put it up on my grandfather's property, and then built another little extra place next to it so that there'd be a men's and women's changing rooms at the pool. And then when my grandfather died, there was a lot of question whether we'd be able to keep that property, but we all knew we wanted to keep the Haida house. So my mother and Will went to British Columbia and found Dudley Carter, who was by this time in his 90s. And I had to show this beautiful charcoal drawing by George Stedekian because it's a detail of the front door of the Haida house. And it's such a beautiful door, and it's such a beautiful drawing. So there's Will and Dudley Carter in the process of taking the house and reconstructing it in Big Sur, where it would be safe in case we lost the property. And so Sam, my cousin Sam, was one of the people that worked on this, and also Ray Byrne, Jeannie Byrne's husband. So anyway, the house came to its new location where it's safe and sound. And good things happen here. Mary Schley being christened. And Biff Smith, longtime RLS teacher, and Sherna Stewart, one of the original Land Trust founders, and David Hill from All Saints Episcopal Church. So, good things. Okay, number one, make the world a better place by making it a more beautiful place. These are just a few of the things that Will was involved in as far as community action. And it's a pretty big list, but I didn't realize that I'd have such a big screen here. So I thought I wouldn't be able to fit any more on it. because you wouldn't be able to read it, but such a huge screen. But anyway, it just, he was constantly trying to make his town a better town, and and Big Sur and the county and everything a better, more beautiful place. This was Monterey before the urban development that Will and Hall and Goodhue were involved in. There was a bunch of problems, and basically Monterey wanted to see more tourists, but give them a place. It wanted hotels and parking, and it wanted to accentuate the idea of the historical aspect of Monterey. And so they, in 1957, they got money from the state parks, and that was the beginning of the urban renewal. They sent out proposals, requests for proposals, and they started tearing down a lot of buildings in downtown to make way for whatever the urban renewal would bring. Eventually, they chose a plan by the design team of Lawrence Halprin, John Carl Warneke, and Lawrence Livingston. And that took, as we know, the traffic that was coming from Seaside and from Highway 1 from the north that was headed to Cannery Row and Pacific Grove underneath Monterey, and made a public plaza on top. But for various reasons, that was as far as that plan went. There was a big hurry to get that done in time for the 1970 centennial, but what happened, a lot of things, like there was supposed to be a big department store and they pulled out. Anyway, come a new mayor, and he got a new design team. And this design team was Hall and Goodhue, William Coccolino, Wallace Holmes, and Will Shaw and Associates. And this was a big focus for him. A lot of stuff got given to other people in the office when this came along, because this was something that was really near and dear to his heart. This was where he gets to paint that brush on his own town. And I think it was also very stressful. But if you look at the adobes that he's restored and the other historical buildings, I put them in orange on this map so that you could see. I mean, this wasn't like he got a job in some other town. This was really home. He'd already done a lot of work in this neighborhood. So that big green line, that's Alvarado Street, and you can see the wharf at the end, and the Cooper Malera adobe at the other end. And so on the plaza was kind of a big, empty, desolate place, and he wanted to capture it. So he proposed that the museum building, which is now the Maritime Museum, be placed between the plaza and the parking to capture that side, the east side of the plaza. And then, as it was described in the proposal, he wanted to link the magic of water with the commerce. So pulling Alvarado Street and the wharf together. And another important thing that gets talked about in the proposal is the pedestrian connection between the adobes and downtown. And you can see that kind of dotted path. he actually had it cut through some places where it hasn't actually been built that way. But okay, so here's the Customs House, and there's Cooper Malera on the other end of Alvarado Street. So those become the two anchors, and the commerce is in between. So this is one of the sketches from the proposal, and you can see how it was built today. You see the Customs House in the back there. And you kind of see Cooper Malera down there. But you can also see that it was important to maintain the mostly two-story corridor that Alvarado Street is. And so guidelines were presented that you had to pull back away when you were on Alvarado Street so that you didn't interrupt that corridor, even though they wanted, you know, a big conference center and hotels and stuff to be part of this. And there you see the museum is anchoring and framing the view with the Customs House on the other side. And then the whole idea of the gardens, it's kind of beautiful the way it's written in the written part of this, because it talks about, you know, the gardens are supposed to kind of draw you in, and maybe there's a door where, you know, am I allowed to go in there? And then, because there's no sign or anything, and then you go in and suddenly you're in a magic garden. And that happens a lot in the area around the Customs House Plaza, and it's very successful. Here's where he really wanted this garden behind the First Theater to connect all the way down to the Sobranis house on the other end of the block, so that you'd be cutting through these back alleys and end up here. And then it's kind of cool when you look at this building the other way, then it's like, oh, that's my hotel down there. I know where I am now. So you could get through. And then Heritage Harbor was another part of it. So you go past the whaling station, and there were the idea there was the buildings were very low, so that you could so you wouldn't interrupt this view. He sort of imagined Heritage Harbor as being a land-based retail that it was sort of like the response to the wharf. It's not that, but it's still a nice area. So that's the Custom House Plaza. And I think it was something that he was really happy to have been involved in. And he and my mother were some of the first to be out here playing bocce ball. So I'm going to end with a walk through the Pfeiffer Point House, because it's my favorite building of Will's, and this is just a little walk through. I've referred to it a lot during the lecture, but I'm not going to leave it this time. I'm just going to go through the whole house. I mean, not the whole house, but a lot of it. Okay, so this is from my mother's diary. They purchased the land in '67. They bulldozed it in '71. And then we had a Thanksgiving picnic, because this was my mother's house, and my mother made sure that this house was part of all our lives at every opportunity to come down and enjoy it with her. Back just that Lawrence Halprin's notebook, and the idea that you have a protected side of the house, and you have the roof kind of deflecting the wind on the other side. And this is how it looks at Sea Ranch, the hedgerow houses. And this is the section of Will's house where you see the backside is cut out to be a protected courtyard. The other thing that was a big deal when it was published was the fact that Sea Ranch used indigenous materials, which was kind of exciting at that time. And you see that, of course, because the Dolan Creek Bridge is the material that built this house. There's the back protected courtyard, and the walls and the benches, and inside the columns, they're all Dolan Creek Bridge. When you look at this and you remember him making that doodle that says "Love is a shell," you can see the sides of this house are very closed, and it's very hunkered down. And then you have just that one V-shaped open window to the view, and then you have the protected courtyard in the back. And the hunkered downness is a direct result that the grade is virtually identical to the slope of the roof. So you have them working together. So let the party begin. So construction starts, and we have a picnic, and the beams go up, and there was no cranes or anything, so they made a kind of a rig that the beams, the posts fit into, and then there's a hinge, and you push it up with a 2x4, and it clunks into place. And then you fly a kite. Charlie O. And then there are the Dolan Creek Bridge beams going into place. And there's the stairs in the middle of the house. There's Will and Mother on the stairs. And that over there is the stairs to the tennis court at Sea Ranch. So Will's standing at the top of it. And then around the stairs get built the house. Will on the scaffolding. And another picnic, Mickey Munig. The fireplace, Bill Wishon built it. There it is done. Kind of just zoomed out here so you can see it in context. And then, this peak that comes down into the cathedral-like court space, when you're down at those windows up close, they're amazing because all the wood and the stops, it almost feels like there's nothing holding the glass in, that it's just part of the wood. And when you get up really close, it becomes this kind of abstraction because it feels so seamless there. And then around the edges, because he wanted to let the view in, but not too much, because love is a shell and it's all closed and tight and cozy, he made the walls, the boards in the wall, have windows that were exactly the same size as the boards. So you could open up the wall in these different locations and have windows if you wanted to. And then from the outside, they just kind of looked like part of the rhythm of the building. It's an interesting house because it just doesn't seem like it's very big from the outside. And yet, you look at it from the outside and it's a little house, but if you look at that lantern hanging in the window there, and you look at that from the inside, which is this over on the right, it's part of a really big grand space. The front deck, surrendering to nature. Thank you, Will. That's it.